All right, hello everybody. So fresh from some notes on hormones. Let's now focus on exactly how these hormones work to make the menstrual cycle happen. So just as a quick reminder, we've got our 4 hormones, 2 of which are secreted from the pituitary gland in the brain, and 2 of which are made and secreted in the ovaries. We have FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH. These are both secreted from the pituitary gland in the brain. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone right here. Let's see here. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the growth of the follicle. The follicle is where the egg will mature. It's where something grows. Just like in a hair follicle, your hair grows out of there. And then luteinizing hormone is an interesting one. It only peaks when ovulation is about to happen. Now, ovulation is when the mature egg releases from the follicle. Now, this is all happening in the ovary. And then we have our other 2 hormones, which are estrogen, which increases the growth of the endometrium, stimulates growth of the endometrium. And then there's progesterone, which keeps that endometrium lining nice and thick. So the menstrual cycle, we're going to say, is a 28-day cycle, fully acknowledging that every individual female has their own menstrual cycle, and some experience ones that are a little longer, some experience ones that are shorter and more frequent. And menstruation is what you think of as the period when this endometrium is going to shed and all of the tissue and mucus and blood and things like that come out. And at the end of that cycle, as that process is happening, another new mature egg is starting to form. And so fully acknowledging that everybody's menstrual cycle is really unique, we're going to do this like idealized menstrual cycle where it's a 28-day cycle, and right in the middle on day 14 is when ovulation happens. Okay, let's talk about the menstrual cycle now. There are 4 phases. 4 phases. One is called the follicular phase. Has to do with the follicle. So in the follicular phase, follicle stimulating hormone is produced. Now you can see that right up here in this graph when we have this little increase of follicle stimulating hormone. Then it drops down. So this little increase right here. So the follicle is in the ovary. So still on point there. The follicle is in the ovary. So I love this little graph right over here because we can see this is the follicle growing, and I love that it's pointing here at the ovary. So the follicle is growing. Now, what's really cool is that the follicle starts to produce estrogen. And estrogen inhibits FSH, which is why you see this FSH drop, because the body doesn't want to mature more than one egg at once. It does happen in rare cases, which is where twins can come from. But so that follicle stimulating hormone drops. It inhibits the production of that, just like when we talked about how some things inhibit the development of hormones yesterday. Okay? So that estrogen, because estrogen starts to increase, you can see our estrogen line going up here. As our estrogen line is going up, so does the thickness of the endometrium. Okay, so our couple things that happen here. The follicle-stimulating hormone is secreted, and it stimulates the growth of the ovarian follicles. This causes estrogen to be produced, which reduces the amount of FSH. And then finally, the estrogen increases the thickness of the endometrium. Those are three things you want to go back in your notes right there. 1, 2, 3 bullet points that need to be in your notes about the follicular phase. So pause the video as you need to and go back and write those 3 things down. Step 2 is ovulation. I cannot spell. Ovulation. Okay. Ovulation. So the estrogen is going to then, even though the estrogen inhibits FSH, it does promote the development of luteinizing hormone. So it promotes LH. And when it gets to a certain amount, all of a sudden it's going to kick in the anterior pituitary gland to release a bunch of LH. So a whole bunch of LH gets released. And when that LH gets released and it peaks right here, right about day 14, you can see that the egg is going to be released from the follicle. Now, the cool thing, and this is why it's called luteinizing hormone, is that this follicle then becomes something else. Okay, so we've got 2 things that happen in ovulation. We have the estrogen stimulating the release of luteinizing hormone, and actually a little bit of FSH too. And that's going to cause the follicle to rupture and release an egg. This is ovulation. So there's 2 things you should have there. Which brings us to number 3, the luteal phase. It's called the luteal phase because this follicle doesn't quite disappear, but instead it becomes something new. It turns kind of yellowish, and luteal is a Greek root. Hello, cat. That's Charles Perwin, everybody. He's really noisy. The luteal means yellow, and so this becomes this yellowish thing. And this yellowish structure starts secreting progesterone, which is why the progesterone line starts to increase. So the progesterone, so we've got this mature egg out here floating down the fallopian tubes, kind of rolling right along, and hopefully the body is like, okay, well, let's get ready in case this egg gets fertilized here. And so what's going to happen is the follicle becomes the luteal body, and it's going to start secreting a bunch of progesterone. So it kind of makes sense because if the egg needs to be fertilized, it needs a nice, thick endometrium to implant on. And so therefore, that progesterone that this luteal body, or corpus luteum is also something that it's called, this corpus luteum starts producing a bunch of progesterone to keep that endometrium lining nice and thick. Now, so the luteal phase, so we've got a couple things happening here. We have the follicle becoming the corpus luteum. We've got the corpus luteum secreting progesterone. And that endometrium layer becomes nice and thick. A fourth thing is that you don't want to produce a new egg when hopefully this one gets fertilized. And so the high levels of progesterone and estrogen inhibit the growth and the production of FSH and LH. Finally, we get to number 4. Number 4 happens if the egg doesn't get fertilized, and this is menstruation. Now, when you look at this picture here, you can see this corpus luteum gets smaller and smaller and smaller. What's it producing? It's producing estrogen and progesterone. And so if this goes away, then the estrogen and progesterone decrease. And if the estrogen and progesterone decrease, what happens to the hormones that it's inhibiting? They go up. And so, if fertilization doesn't happen, the corpus luteum goes away. That's your first one. Your second one is that estrogen and progesterone levels drop, and the endometrium is eliminated from the body, and that's what we call the period. Since the estrogen and progesterone levels are really low now, that means FSH and LH are going to come up, and the whole process will begin again. If the embryo does implant, then the embryo will start to, well, not the embryo, but the structures that form around it start to release a whole bunch of molecules that keep that corpus luteum in place so that that endometrium stays nice and thick and can fertilize. Not fertilize, I'm sorry, but sustain and develop the growing baby. Okay. So that's it for the menstrual cycle. So let's move over here and let's spend just a little bit of time, just honestly a few minutes, talking about male reproduction. Now next year you're going to learn how meiosis is used to produce sperm, but let's talk really quick about the Y chromosome. So the Y chromosome is a short little stubby chromosome that does not have many genes on it at all. There is one gene called the SRY gene, and that SRY gene is a gene that codes for a particular protein that causes the testes to form. SRY is short for sex-determining region Y. And so the production of those testes is reliant on the testosterone that develops. And that testosterone promotes the further development of those sex characteristics that males have, like hair on the armpits and the genital region, on the face, broader shoulders, deeper voice, and some things like that. If that protein, that testes determining factor protein, isn't produced, then the gonads that are growing in the ovary will end up becoming ovaries instead. All right, so we drew the female reproductive system. We are now going to draw the male reproductive system. All right, so here we go. This is kind of a crazy one. There's a lot of tubes in this one, so you really got to pay attention to what we do. All right, so first we're going to draw the testes. Testis is singular, but this is where sperm and testosterone are produced. Sperm and testosterone are produced. All right. Just outside of that is a little bunch of tissue called the This is where the sperm matures. Sperm matures. And develops its tail. And here it is stored until ejaculation happens. Okay, so out of the epididymis is going to come a tube. Now, this tube is going to get real loopy. It's going to get real loopy here. So it is going to come up and around here. Okay, some other stuff is going to join in here, but let's pause for a second and add something in here. I need to erase just a little bit. Oh no, that was a lot. Okay. I need to erase a little bit. And we're going to add in a new structure here. Okay, we've got our new structure. This is the seminal vesicle. All right, so the seminal vesicle, the seminal vesicle adds sugars, proteins, and mucus to the sperm. This mixture of everything together is now called semen. The fructose is there to nourish the sperm. It's a sugar called fructose. It's there to keep give the sperm some energy as it does all the swimming. The mucus is there to help it move, protects the sperm. Some of the proteins there's actually a protein in there that'll help to trigger uterine contractions. Okay. Now, another tube is going to come in, join in here. And this tube is connected up here to the urinary bladder. This tube is the ureter. Now, up until this point, this tube has a name, and that name is the vas deferens. The vas deferens is what is cut and tied off if you get a vasectomy. So the only thing that can't get there, so if you cut and tie it off right here, the only thing that doesn't get into the ejaculate is sperm. Okay, so we've got the ureter here. Now, as these tubes all join together here, they are now called the urethra. So, this is what comes outside of the body. So imagine this is the stomach here. There's where the scrotal sac is, and this tube coming out of the body, this is what the penis is right here. So we don't need to know the penis, we don't need to know the scrotum or anything like that. We just need to know the parts associated with the whole reproductive side of it. Okay. I believe that is it for all of that. So I will see you all later.